Let's start with, it's funny, I teach here, and I just watched it. It was very striking. You realize how professorial the experience is in the first year in a way that I take for granted. No student fears me. And I, as some of you know, nobody fears me. And I thought, it would be nice to be feared for a moment, just for a second. But we'll get to that. John, you had written originally the novel, and I know that it said in the film that you were also a technical advisor, so you also were involved in the making of the film. In what way did the film deviate from the novel?
Well, the film is really, really close to the novel. You know, I mean, there's some things you had to deviate, and there's a couple of things that Jim Bridges had some smart ideas about, and some stupid ideas too.
What's stupid?
Well, the scene where Kevin goes in to meet the tutor,
right,
is not that way in the book. It's questionable. You know, even 35 years ago, that was a questionable scene. It's very sexist, I think.
Well, yes.
But the idea that Susan was married before, I took it up to that line, and I didn't want to go that far, and he just flicked it over that line.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, cautionary words to some of my students who may be here, who I make fun of, that you know no culture and all you know is law. Let me tell you something. People don't score with blonde-haired women so quickly just by talking about law. That's just never happened. So if you think that's going to work, that's not going to work. All right, so what I said in class is still true. No other things other than the law. It's like shocking for him to do so well in the first week.
But he doesn't do so well in the book, but I thought that was a brilliant cut. You know, the first Paper Chase cut was 4 hours long. You know, right. And there was a lot of development of that relationship, but something's got to go.
But it was edited, cut quicker, and it got to it quicker.
Yeah, it was cut,
Did you
as
know,
quickly as you could cut.
Right, and it comes across seamless. Did you know people in law school? Did you know a Bell? Did you know a Brooks? Did you know a Hart? Were you Hart?
Well, if you're going to write a book, you should make yourself the hero, because it's a lot of work.
So you were Kingsfield?
No, Hart is the hero. But, I had a study group, and I'm still friends with my study group, and they're both lawyers. Two of them are lawyers in San Francisco, very good lawyers.
Was there a Brooks who left?
There are a lot of Brooks.
But was there in your group?
There was not in my study group, but there were people who killed themselves. So, yeah.
Paul, you're the definitive expert on law and film. Where does this film rate or rank this story in the narrative of Real Justice? The book will be available for sale. I know you set it up in various different categories. What category is The Paper Chase?
Well, unfortunately, no discredit to The Paper Chase. If you get the book or look at it, you won't see the paper chase in the book. But it's not because of the quality of the film. It's because the Real Justice about courtroom films. And I told Mr. Osborne before, if he would rewrite the movie now with a courtroom scene, I'd be delighted to include it in the next edition, if there is one of Real Justice. But I think it's a marvelous movie. I mean, I'm just watching it, and I'm captivated by the various experiences it has about being a law student. When it came out, it was much closer to my own law student days, and now, so I looked at it then from the perspective of a law student. Now, like a lot of us here, probably more from the perspective of the other side of the podium, but how well it captures the experiences of law. I think it holds up very well. So I was delighted with the movie.
Dean Traynor, I don't know if we have any Family Day people here, but would you represent that the first year experience at Fordham is anything like the experience in The Paper Chase?
No. I'd particularly say that we're prospective first years here. No, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, this really captures a certain era in American legal education. But I think it's dramatically changed since that time. I mean, and when I went to law school, I think it was really kind of the tail end of that period. So as I watched it, it really it felt like I was a first-year law student again. The large class, so that's a classroom of about 140 people. You know, when I started teaching here, we had classes of 120. Now we don't have classes bigger than 80. There's smaller classes. It's all of the exams, I think, in the movie and at the time are at the end of the first year. So you don't have any feedback on the semester. There's no talk about, you know, we have a legal writing class. There's nothing like that. So it all ultimately rides. You have these huge classes. It's pure Socratic. I think very few people do pure Socratic teaching these days. And then it's just this one series of terrifying exams
Could you just
at the end of the
quickly
year.
just remind everyone what Socratic means? Because we, as you know, most of our audience, Dean Traynor, we're thankfully not all lawyers.
Well, I think actually, is there a definition of Socratic questioning? It's, you know, it's Kingsfield never says any answers. So it's all just asking questions and having the students struggle to come up with answers. So it's modeled after Socrates' dialogues. But it's, you know, at the very beginning he says, you know, what were you expecting, Hart? A lecture? And the kind of the classic first year legal education, which is not that way anymore, is all about just asking questions and leaving the students kind of profoundly trying to figure out what's going on, you know.
I'm going to ask this question to both the dean and Professor Bergman. You know, there are people, cultural critics per se, people who are critical of the American educational system and say that we baby students too much. They're pampered, that there's not enough rigorous requirements and rigorous thinking. Surely that's not true at Fordham Law School. But is that part of what you said is the transformation in the way American legal education has shifted? Because we really don't, I mean, are you suggesting, Dean Traynor, that students simply don't fear this fearful anymore? That this sense of intimidation, this sense of utter sense of horror is not, certainly not here and not elsewhere? And, and was there value to scaring the shit out of people?
Well, you know, my perspective on that is to say that it doesn't exist is to somewhat, that's this side of the, you know, that's the faculty perspective on it. I would bet that, you know, you don't need to be Kingsfield. You don't need, you know, there's an element of Kingsfield who is kind of threatening or at least impersonal. You know, that line at the end where, you know, after this whole year where Hart is sort of obsessed with Kingsfield, he gets in the elevator and he says, "Oh, what was your name again?" There's that impersonal aspect to it. But I would suspect that if you're a first-year student, and, you know, and I know that, you know, and Dean Traynor knows, and certainly Mr. Osborne knows when we're teaching, and you, Thane, you know, we're nice people. You know, we want them to feel comfortable. We want them to know that we're enjoying this experience. We want to help them. But if you're called on, even if you're called on by a nice guy in front of 80 people, you know, 80 is still a lot of people. If you've come from a college background and you've been basically scribbling notes and writing exams and sort of flying below the radar, I think you're pretty frightened. You don't need to be Kingsfield to add that extra bit of intimidation. So I think in many ways the film reflects the student experience, which, you know, in many ways I think still exists.
Dean Traynor, are we coddling students today in the post-paper chase era?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're coddling them. I mean, I think, you know, Mr. Bergman's point, I think, is right in the sense that I think it can be a very scary experience for law students. Because, first of all, you have to talk in front of a large group of people, which is supposed to be the thing people fear most. You know, that is always on the list of, you know, what do you most fear? You know, talking in public is always at the very top. It's something that you don't have control over, so you're being asked questions. So, I mean, I think that element of it is really enduring. On the other hand, I mean, there is a meanness to Kingsfield, I think. You know, kind of an almost a sadistic quality to what he's doing, which I think is intentional, and I think is is not the case anymore.
We certainly don't have
We
that.
don't. Well, I mean, no, we don't. I mean, you know, you don't. And I think also just the pure Socratic questioning is really, it's not a very good way to teach. I don't think. I mean, I think there's certain things that it helps you do, but it's just essentially one skill. But it doesn't. It's not very good at teaching you the substantive law, for example.
It's a great way to scare you and to keep you alert. It may not be a great teaching tool, but it makes sure that you're not, well, did you notice there were no laptops? I think Harvard students were very poor in those days, and they couldn't afford the laptops. But today, you know, as we know, we have them, and God knows, you know, they could be emailing for all we know. And those guys were not. They were clearly alert, clearly fearful.
Can I say something
Yes.
about this argument? Because
Yes.
I teach contract law, and I don't call on anybody.
You don't call it anyone.
Nobody.
Purely lecture.
No,
And-
no,
and
no,
they
no.
raise their hands.
There's no lecture either. If nobody wants to raise their hand, nothing happens. You know, nothing happens in class. And I'd say, well, I'm perfectly willing to stay here, you know. But everybody always wants to talk. And then if somebody's nervous about it, I say, come to my office. You know, and we'll plan out a case a month ahead. And you'll be the smartest person ever. And then you can raise your hand. But if at that moment you don't want to raise your hand, you don't have to.
The
So-
anti-Kingsfield, John J. Osborne.
No, but I mean, I don't
Create-
think there's any reason to call on people. And here's the important thing. I don't know who knows anything. They're the only ones who know whether they have something good to say. So I want them to talk.
I think you used to be a police interrogator. You would just sit there and let the suspect get so nervous, eventually they would start talking. And it's a great technique.
It's kind of good professor, bad professor.
Yeah, right.
No, you see, but it's actually interesting. When I started teaching in 1991, and so I mean, I think, so I went to law school in the early 80s, and I think in a lot of ways it was a transitional period. I mean, when I started, it was felt to me exactly like the start of Paper Chase. You know, by the end of the time, when I graduated, it was considered kind of bad form to what's called cold call on people. You know, which is, you know, Mr. Holwig, you know, what's the answer? You know, so, right, and that was considered inappropriate. But I do actually think that there are advantages because, I mean, one thing that I find is, you know, there are some students who just feel so totally comfortable in talking in public, you know, that they will, you know, raise their hand and you call on them, and they actually haven't thought about what the answer is. But they're so comfortable in talking in public that they figure that they'll be able to get through. Whereas there are other people who have incredibly strong preparation and who are very thoughtful, who are not comfortable talking in public. And so when I teach, I do a mix, but I do, you know, I say everybody in class, I will call on you, and I'm not going to tell you in advance. And I say, like you, if you feel uncomfortable with that, you know, come to me in advance and we'll work something out. So I'll be able to call on you and you'll be prepared. But I think that there is also a real value to having people, you know, not know that they're going to be called on and have to talk in public.
Well, I got to tell you, I completely disagree with you on that. It's kind of fun. It's kind of fun to have a disagreement. I mean, wow. I mean, I come into the class, and when class is going to begin, I stand in front of the classroom. These guys are paying a huge amount of money to go to law school. I'm not going to tell them that I'm just giving you an example, that class is going to start. They have to be quiet on their own. And as soon as they get it, see, once they get it, now I walk to the front of the classroom in the next week, and they're all quiet. I don't have to do a thing. I'm trying to create a class in which the students take charge of the class. You know, if I've got students who are talking all the time, I don't call on them. They don't get to just stand up and talk. They have to at least, you know, the minimal stuff, they have to at least, you know, be acknowledged by me. I want the students, and I got to tell you, one of the reasons I wrote this book, and I will not hog this conversation, but Lon Fuller, who was my contracts professor, perhaps the greatest contracts theorist ever, he said, you know, the purpose of this class is to get you guys to run it. So the last week, you will run it. And I will sit in the back of the classroom. And that's what he did. You know,
Yeah,
the last week.
Is he the model for Kingsfield?
What?
Is he the model
No,
for Kingsfield?
and Lon Fuller, I became his research assistant, was one of the sweetest, nicest Southern gentlemen, and never called on anybody.
So who was the model for Kingsfield?
Kingsfield is a work of fiction, you know? It's true, but there are a lot of people who want to be the model for Kingsfield. But Lon Fuller actually believed he was the model for Kingsfield. And we were shooting an episode of The Paper Chase that was based on The Splunkian Explorer, something he wrote. And Lon had died, and his wife had to give consent for us to use that. And she finally went and looked at The Paper Chase, the movie. She'd never seen it. And she said, I'm not giving you consent. You've created a travesty on Lon, you know? Anyway, and I said, I'm sorry, but I hate to break this to you, but he was not the model for Kingsfield. And then she gave consent.
The paradox of art.
Yeah.
You created this iconic contracts professor, and you don't buy into any of the premises of what he did.
Well, that's why I wrote the book.
I said the paradox
Yeah,
of art.
Yeah.
You know, when I saw the film, I think I was in 10th or 11th grade. That dates me, I guess. And Mr. Moses, my English teacher at the time, we were reading Moby Dick. And I had said in class, I said, well, you know, Moby Dick is just like The Paper Chase, which was not the thing to say to Mr. Moses. Because I saw this in those terms. I thought Kingsfield, of course, was Moby Dick, and Ahab was Hart. Follow me, with you. I'm sorry, Ishmael I thought was not, I thought Ahab was actually Hart, and Ishmael was either, well, it could have been Ford, whoever would have been narrating the story. It is an odd hunt. It's almost a sort of strange, curious cat and mouse, twisted love story, not just with the daughter, but with the father. That there is the chase for the whale. The whole movie is about this chase for the whale. And you see the smirk in Hart's face when he realizes, you know, he's now sleeping with the whale's daughter, right? Can only get closer this way. Fabulous. And so, I mean, I saw it in those terms. Again, my 11th grade teacher did not approve, but I saw it again. I still think there is this very strong line of a kind of deeper connection that is sought. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, you know, when the film came out, many people don't remember, it was also turned into a television show. Mm-hmm. There were several lives, right? And I think you were involved in that. There was a PBS. The first year was turned into first year was, how many episodes was that?
Well, there was a year on CBS.
Then 2 years on Showtime.
No, then there was a year on PBS.
Oh, PBS, CBS, thank
yeah,
you.
and then there were 5 years on Showtime.
5 years on Showtime. Hart, of course, becomes editor-in-chief of the Law Review, right? I mean, it just really moves forward. You are so remarkably identified with this character.
I know, it's
You've
sad.
never been able to, you can't shake it.
Yeah.
Let me ask maybe Paul and also John. You know, at the film festival, we're interested in these various films about law and culture, and many of the films that we see are films that deal with the compromised lawyer, or there's the crusading lawyer, right? So we have lawyers that are compromised, corrupted, you know, like the Michael Claytons. Of course, then they get redeemed. And then we have the crusading lawyers, right? Paul Newman in The Verdict, even you could say Aaron Brockovich is a crusading lawyer, John Travolta in A Civil Action. This movie takes place, and the novel takes place before people become a lawyer. It's very unusual in that way. We never get to the point. And I would, being a practicing attorney, I'm wondering whether you view, and whether Paul perhaps views, that this is a purely cautionary tale, a buyer beware.
Well, there is some of that in Susan, I think, who says that, you know, Harvard is already changing you. You've only been in here a few months, and be careful because you're going to become somebody that I no longer want to be with, and I don't want to recognize, and you're not going to recognize. And I hope for your sake that you flunk out of Harvard. So there's kind of this is your chance to save your soul.
But that's really weird because it's coming from this cursed woman. I mean, really, she's hot, but she has a long-term history before she was the Bionic Woman, remember? She was always like a robot, let's face it. That was her whole thing. Lindsay Wagner's character, Susan, is corrupting. She's already, one guy already, and it's a very disingenuous advice she's giving a guy who she's already destroyed one guy's legal career. She's the curse. Kingsfield's daughter is the curse for anybody who's with her. So it's sort of I thought, a very twisted piece of, soul-saving information.
Yeah, I agree with that, but it's echoed sort of in Kingsfield, saying, you come here with minds made out of mush, and when you leave here, you're going to be thinking like a lawyer, and there's a whole lot in here about how going to law school changes who you are, and how you think, and what you're like, and certainly, there's almost like a pre-literate society here that, that Hart is part of. And now he's going to join this rationalistic society, and he's going to be different. And everyone has, kind of a, to the extent you think negatively of lawyers, you're seeing them in their sort of pure larva stage, and then when they get out and start flying, their wings develop, it's not so pretty for society.
Yes, John, I'm just curious. You can respond to that, but I'm also curious what you think the Susan character means in our universe.
Look. There are two competing narratives. The paper chase is about how we develop the narrative of our own life. Now, Hart comes into law school, and Kingsfield says to him, you come in here with a skull full of mush, i.e. you know absolutely nothing. I am going to transform you into a new kind of person, a person who thinks like a lawyer, as if you hadn't been thinking straight before. You are going to learn to sit in a new way. You'll sit in a seating chart. You're going to learn to participate in a new way. I will call on you. Everything will be new, right? Susan says, nothing is new. You can't possibly do that. You are who you are. It's a trick. It's an illusion. Stay with yourself. Keep your own narrative. Who were you before law school? Where were you going? You see, and there are these two competing narratives. And when that's why Hart has to throw away the grades. The grades are the ultimate end of the Kingsfield narrative. Which way is he going to go? And that's what the paper chase at its fundamental core is about. Are we going to let law school twist us into this new narrative? And law school is still doing that to law students, only in a much more subtle way than it used to.
I just want to follow up on that and give you, there's a lot of opposites in this movie, because at the same time that he's throwing away these grades, we know he's going to look later or somehow find out. How do we know that? But, I think. That's what I think.
That's only because you've been caught up in the law school narrative.
That's true.
Well, wait, no, John. John, to be fair,
true.
You were involved in the CBS and PBS and Showtime's versions, and Hart does phenomenally well in law school.
Right.
You took him. You didn't let him drop out of school. When
Look.
they consulted with you, you said, Hart, in fact, I think is offered a Supreme Court clerkship.
But before I lose my point, at the same time he throws away his paper, Susan is holding her paper. Their divorce is final, and that changes the narrative of her life. So I think there's a lot of interesting juxtapositions in the movie going on. That's
Good
the
call,
that's the
Paul.
point I wanted to make.
Yes.
What is the Woody Allen movie where he's offering his theory on Marshall McLuhan, and then Marshall
Annie Hall.
McLuhan comes out and disagrees with him. So this is my moment of disagreeing with Marshall McLuhan.
You're Marshall McLuhan.
You're Marshall
tonight.
McLuhan in this.
Oh, no.
But you'll come out and say, I totally disagree with you.
That's so stupid. Because I think when I saw this the first time, when I was in law school, I thought Susan was really the one who had the kind of the true insight. And now when I see this, I think Susan is a terrible person.
She's evil.
I mean, she's really...
She's hot but evil.
That's right.
You know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think... I mean,
Bill.
she's really trying to steer him down the wrong way.
Horrible.
And Kingsfield, with all of his, difficulties, is a much more honorable person.
Yeah.
Even to the fact that, when Hart challenges him in class and they have the, here's the dime, call your mother, he then gives Hart away to essentially save face and return to the class. So, I think Kingsfield, first of all, by the end of the year, Hart is really a delightful person. I think, except for when he bails out on the weekend on the Cape, he really doesn't do anything bad in the course of the entire year. I mean, he's he's the only one who cares about Kevin. He really, cares about all the people as they drop out of the study group. He's a figure of remarkable integrity. And between the two competing offers, it's really Kingsfield who I think is more appealing and is much more full of integrity.
Marshall?
Well, I mean, it's funny because there's a professor in Sacramento at McGeorge who asked me to come up and debate this very point because he wrote an article saying Kingsfield is the great legal hero of our time. Well, look, guys, I mean, I don't know. Maybe he's transformed himself. He's been in therapy or something. But, when Hart says, I want to tell you, the whole book is going to this point where Hart says to Kingsfield, it's not going to the dime. It's going to the point where Hart says to Kingsfield, you meant something to me, the classmates meant something to me. And Kingsfield says, what was your name? Does Kingsfield know Hart's name? Let me ask you. Hart's been the best student in contracts all year long. He's been sleeping with Kingsfield's daughter. He's been up in Kingsfield's study. He's been out to Kingsfield's house in the Cape. Of course Kingsfield knows his name. And by the way, it was the only question that John Houseman asked me before he started. He said, does Kingsfield know Hart's name? I said, sure he does. He said, I thought so. He's a real son of a bitch, isn't he? That was from Houseman.
I'm sorry to, Bill, you and I are going to beat up on this guy for a second. It's interesting. I love what you're saying because you created this incredibly iconic son of a bitch, as we've been told. And now you're saying, and you're quite right? We all want to buy into the premise that Kingsfield does know Hart's name, right?
He has to. I mean,
right,
otherwise he's an
so
idiot.
if that's true, because we all know that's true, then the question is there value in Hart being treated with this level of emotional detachment, right? I mean, is there a value to that? And you know what? I'll tell you what, this is the first time this dawned on me. This show the Paper Chase is a lot like House. It's exactly like House.
Including the name.
Yes.
Yeah, House.
Houseman, right. Yeah, it's the same
you
idea.
You really should be suing those guys.
Is there value to having
There's
a
not enough
character
time.
who is either broken or withdrawn, who is intentionally showing you, I don't care about you. Don't hook into my life. Don't treat me in a human way. You can try to reach me in a human emotional way. I will reject you because I believe this is better for you at this point.
Well,
And I think there's value
right.
to that.
And I think it's also, I mean, I'm not going to defend that moment. I think that's, when they're in the elevator and he pretends not to recognize Hart. I mean, I think that's a deplorable moment. But I think another piece of it that's interesting is that he's really only alive when he's on stage.
Yeah.
And so, he's just, it's a different person. He's very, all of his interactions when he's not on the lecture podium are very stilted. And so one of the things he's saying is, when we leave the classroom, we no longer have a relationship. I mean, that's part of it. But when he's in the classroom, and not to say that, again, as I said at the beginning, he's not really the model that I would want to follow. But, he does, he clearly cares. I think he clearly does his goal of getting them to think like lawyers. He does achieve that. And I think he's a very effective classroom teacher.
But he's not like Professor Osborne.
Well, first of all, you can't, look, you only got one brain, right? You can't change the synapses. You can only think in a certain way. You can learn about stuff, but you're always going to think in a certain way. It's in your brain.
But he's kind of a sad character too to me. For some of the reasons you were saying, that he really only lives in the classroom, and these are, fragmentary experiences. And then for him, once the class is over, the course is over, these people cease to exist. And all the stuff about the, there's his notes when he was a student. And he's just kind of passing along, it's like he doesn't really have any existence beyond these, what's written on the paper. That's another kind of paper chase, because the imagery of paper is so much in here. And in these red notebooks, this is what he took as a student. And my God, that's what he's talking about now. And, this article he wrote 36 years ago. And it's kind of sad, really. And I like the moment, it's interesting to think about, I think, where Hart, you know, before the janitor comes into the classroom, he's standing there and he's almost pretending he's Kingsfield. And, you know, could he end up a law professor? I mean, he's bright enough, he enjoys the interaction, but you almost get the feeling he's too human in the terms of the movie. I don't think he could become a Kingsfield type of professor, even though he idolizes him. He would be different.
But what if all those photographs of Kingsfield with Adlai Stevenson and Eleanor Roosevelt and Helen Keller, what would you say if I presumed, and you created the man, that when he's hanging out with Helen Keller, he's the life of the party? He is just a different guy with his peers. And he simply, a statement is being made through John's novel and story, that this is a kind of mindset of how one deals as a professional in a kind of detached way. That one is not to be humanized, just like you don't care about whether your doctor has bedside manner, you just want him to be Kingsfield.
Boy, I, for one, do care whether my doctor has a bedside manner. You know, I mean, it's scary enough to go to my doctor. I'd like to be treated with respect. I'd like him to acknowledge my humanity. And then, let me just say something about the teaching experience, because it fascinates me. Look, contract law is inherently interesting. If it's taught the right way, it's phenomenally interesting. It didn't start, it's not a set of rules. It started, you know, thousands of years ago on very human levels of interaction. And the question is, those interactions became, as society became more complicated, those interactions became more complicated, et cetera, et cetera. But it still goes back to these fundamental human values. If you teach contracts that way, it's so exciting for the students. You don't need to call on anybody. You've got everybody sizzling in their seats. That's the way you need to teach it. You know, that's the way Kingsfield sort of should have taught it. That's the way Lon Fuller should have taught it. And that's how they should be teaching law everywhere.
Speaking of calling on people, let's take some questions from the audience. Anything for John or Paul or Dean Traynor? Yes? What is your name?
My name is Jennifer Lack, and we've met, but you don't remember, and that's okay.
I don't know you, and I will not know you.
And I'm not caring about it. You can just take a dime.
That's the
Guys,
relationship. That's
isn't
the
this
relationship
great?
we have.
Indeed. So, John, it's your name?
What?
Yes, it's John.
Yeah.
Hi, John.
Hi.
Yes, this is for you, sir. Why did you write this book? I mean, I read in the little thing there that you wrote this book while you were a 1L at Harvard.
I wrote part of it while I was at 1L, then I finished it the next year. But yeah.
What brought it into your mind?
Well, it was, you know, first of all, I wanted an alternative narrative. You know, Harvard Law School was saying to me that my narrative was going to be going to Wall Street. That was it. You know, and I wanted a different kind of narrative.
That sounded good in the days of the paper chase, by the way. That was
Yeah, and that
a
was
good place to go.
And that was the same thing, though. I mean, when I was at law school, it was exploding because of the Vietnamese War. That was the years when University Hall was taken over by the students, and the Boston police came in. I mean, there was incredible stuff going on. Everybody they were rethinking basic things. And the paper, while I'm doing this, a guy up at Yale was writing a polemic called "How the Law School Fails," and he would ultimately, Duncan Kennedy, become a professor at Harvard Law School. I mean, things were really in flux. So if that's part of it, but I was also pissed off. You know, I had this one guy in contracts who taught a wonderful course, and I had all the other professors who were just evil demons incarnate. You know, and I felt it was my duty to say something about that.
Excellent, Ms. Lack.
Thank you so much.
Yes, back there?
Hi, my name is Kwesi Blair. My question is, from the perspective of a professor or the academic law community, how do you define a student's success? And how do you think that has changed since when the book and the movie came out?
Well, I don't know that it, I'll just answer for myself. I mean, my off-the-cuff reaction is that, you know, to help a student get to where they want to go. I mean, I think most students go to law school for a reason. They have a career path in mind. I I hope my success is the ones who I can talk to personally, that I help them reflect, refine what they want, think about how they want to use their law degree, help them understand what law school is about, because I think this movie, illustrates how, law school just kind of throws, and I think in a way it still does, apart from attitudes of the professor. You just get thrown into something in the first year called the common law process, and you're studying judicial decisions without really ever anyone explaining to you why. Brooks never does really get it. Geez, I've memorized everything. So I hope I help students, to understand a little bit better what's going on in law school, why we're doing what we do, for good or bad, and what else we might do, and help them sort of, I tell them, I'm here to help you. If I can help you think about what you want to do now or in the future, that's what my role is as a law professor. Give you knowledge, but help you use that knowledge in an effective way. I don't have anything more sophisticated than that to say.
Sean, I'm sure you have some thoughts about that.
Well, not much. I mean, at most American law schools, success is defined in terms of grades. So your success or failure is completely in the hands of the professors, and I don't think that's how it should be. I note that Harvard Law School will not have any more grades next year. Kind of an amazing step.
From the paper chase days.
From the paper chase days, yeah.
And no, let me just, I think Paul Borgman has it right, that what a law school should do is equip you to have the kind of legal career that you want to have. And it should also be a place where you can think about the kind of career you want to have. So it's really about, in some sense, empowering you. And it's not, I think one of the things that we're moving away from over time is the sense that, the way in which you're graded, is a determination of whether you're a successful law student or not. I mean, to some extent, it's inevitable in that that's wherever you, are thinking of going, that's a factor that they look at, and give weight to. But that's not, that's not the measure of the kind of success that you will ultimately have. And I also think, just on one other point on legal education, when when Paper Chase was written, the law school career was all about these big lecture courses. And now it's not. So even to the extent of, now, most of our students, for example, will do a clinic when they're in law school. That wasn't part of,
That's much better.
So, and so you get kind of more experience at doing things other than just, learning to, quote unquote, think like a lawyer.
Jeff?
Hi, I'm Jeff. I'm Jeff Goldman, professor at Roosevelt class. I publicly endorse removing grades and ranks. I do just because I've worked so hard to get into this school. I've already proven my mettle. And if first I've worked so hard to get into any law school, I've proven my mettle. And then if I'm at Ford and that should prove something, I think that's the impetus behind Berkeley and Harvard and all the schools that are moving towards that. And then within law school itself, you're then broken down into smaller factions, law review, non-law review students. It's then parsed out that way. And where does it end? It's literally you're either number one or you're not at some point. And so that brings me to the scene that was in the movie where Susan was on the pier, on the frozen pier, and she says to him, "You're the kind the law school wants." What kind is that?
Well, Hart has got Midwestern charm, honesty. If you can, he has a real sense of himself. If they can take him and twist him into their version of what a lawyer is, the law school has succeeded. And Susan's saying, don't let them take that away from you, Hart. Don't let them take your narrative away from you. Don't jump on that bandwagon. Be yourself.
So once removed, though, I think Dean Traynor said, Professor Hausman said he wants to get them to think like lawyers. Is that necessarily a good thing for people who are in the business of justice?
But this whole thing is, this thinking, what Kingsfield's saying is different. I mean, it's good to be able to think like a lawyer in the sense of knowing what's going on in court and knowing how to make a legal argument. That isn't thinking differently. That's just knowing more about a particular form, a particular form in which you participate. It's like, you know, if you want to participate in a medical discussion, you've got to get some tools to be able to do that. But that's not thinking differently. Kingsfield is saying, I'm actually going to make you think differently. Your brain will operate differently when you're through with this course. You will be a different person. And Susan's saying that is a dangerous, you know, bargain with the devil to buy into. You will change your soul if you go into that. You won't know yourself.
I mean, one thing that strikes me in the movie is, at least as I look at the characters, there's a sense that there's a certain way that people think. And it's not just that people are different, but that there's certain mental processes, and you can't learn a different way to think. For example, Kevin, who's the one who has the photographic memory, who tries to kill himself. Actually, this is one thing that I would kind of take issue with. I think the movie, and I think this is a difference between us. I mean, you watch the movie and you think Kevin just could not think like a lawyer, because what he's about is, basically regurgitating facts. He can remember and he can restate, but he can't analyze. And just as a professor, you see Kevin and you see he's awfully bright. And you know that you could sit him down and help him think through these cases and draw the distinctions that lawyers do. And that's not invading his soul. That's just teaching him a skill that a lawyer needs to be able to argue in court.
Well, I agree with everything you just said. I mean, Harvard Law School should have had when I was there, it does now, but when I was there, have a program for people like Kevin where you actually could help him. Professors would bring him in. I agree with all of that. That's absolutely right.
Hey,
And
Jeff,
they do.
by the way, I was planning on giving you an A anyway. You didn't have to do that. That whole thing you just did, it was totally pointless. Really, just a waste of time. In fact, now I'm rethinking it. Yes. Is it on? Oh.
In the movie, you showed the students working so hard that they really didn't have a life of their own. Was that true then, and is it true today? If so, if it really was so all-encompassing at the time, how did you find time to write your book?
Well, I didn't write well, by the time, the first-year student was that way for me. By the time I was a third-year student, there wasn't enough to do, And I got the law school to give me credit for writing the book, which was its own struggle. I went into the Associate Dean's office and said, I want credit for writing a novel. And he said, we don't do that. And anyway, a long, involved story, but they gave me credit. Yeah.
Yeah, speaking for me, I didn't have much of a life as a first-year law student, but I didn't have much of a life before coming to law school, so I didn't really notice the difference. It's certainly not true today. I can tell you about UCLA, the students are organized, and I'm sure it's true at Fordham and USF. Students are organized in all sorts of interest groups, and there's social clubs, and there's, I think this is a great, before you become a law student, when you're starting law school, I think movies like this, or this movie, is a great movie to show your parents, and because they'll think that, you're not responsible for anything for the next year. Just send you money, just, you just need to eat, and, and this is, you're going through hell. The reality from the inside, it's not that bad.
I was really struck, we're going to take one more question. I was struck also, I don't know if many of you recognize how many really great actors were very young in the film. Actually, one of the actors, the woman up front who did Cobalt, the question, was it the name of the case, Cobalt Steel, or whatever?
Carbolic
Carbolic.
Carbolic, I'm sorry. I should have known that from first year.
Smokeball.
The Smokeball, of course. That's Blair Brown.
Yep.
Is that right?
Who is someone I know, and I invited her to come today. She couldn't make it, but I wanted to surprise you all with, Blair Brown lives, downtown, and I gave her a shot to be here today and surprise you all. But, there's so many people. The character that Paul Bergman claims he was in law school is the Ed Herman character in, what's his name? The Robo character.
Anderson.
Many of you know him as the father from the Gilmore Girls.
Yeah.
right? I mean, just trying to go through Lindsay Wagner, of course, The Bionic Woman. James Naughton was in Chicago, became a great song in Brooks.
John Williams did the music, is that right?
Yeah, it was just there were many more actors. The guy who played the dorm guy is really famous. He was in 30-something. He played Miles Drentrell.
I thought that the janitor was Abe Vigoda, but
Yeah. No. All right, let's go back there. Maybe we'll see if there's more time. Yes, Brian.
Hi, Brian Stevens, my third year in Professor Rosenbaum's class.
Brian, you are not getting a good grade. just so whatever you say doesn't matter.
Basically, we've talked about the difference, how professors have changed that you've seen when you all were in law school. And my question kind of complements the last question, is in terms of the students. How do you think the intensity or the character of law students has changed over the years? Because for me, I'm kind of frightened by law students. I was a TA last year in legal writing. I had some really great experiences with some kids, but I also was asked some very some questions that were, it was completely competitive and somewhat arbitrary, and you read things like about the law. So I was curious if you've seen in your experience, not only as being a law student but now teaching, that the nature of law students has changed.
Well, I'll start off. I can only talk for my cohort. We were products of the '60s. I think a lot of us went to law school with an idea of just doing social good, and we didn't know what lawyers did. Most of the people were nice people. Virtually all the students I associate with now or talk to, they're nice people. I would say the biggest change, perhaps, that off the surface, apart from this, they're just looking so much more diverse. There's many more different people from different backgrounds in law school, but they're much more sophisticated, I would say, than I was. I mean, they know much more about what they want to do. Most of them, they have ideas. They want to specialize in their studies. They were almost like taking a major. When I went to school, it's much more, hey, take whatever courses went with your sleep schedule. So I think, going in, students change when they're in law school, perhaps, but they go in and they're much more sophisticated than when when I went to law school, and certainly much more sophisticated than me.
it's so much more the diversity, the racial and gender diversity. I mean, in some way, the fact that it's an all white male study group, so that group that you see again and again and again, and there's no indication that they've done anything except come right from college.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably the biggest change in a relatively short period of time.
Although the few years later, John knows this because I think I must be the only person who remembers it as a television show. But Bill, the very next time when they went on PBS, you introduced a woman in the study group.
Oh yeah, I mean.
Right. It was only a few years later, and all of a sudden you said, "Oh no, we need a woman."
Well, we also upped the ratio between women and men. If you look at the classroom in the TV series, it's almost 50% women.
Yeah.
And we just said, okay, we're going to adopt an equal admissions policy at Harvard Law School.
And that's only about 10 years, but
Yeah.
less than 10 years from when you wrote the novel.
Yeah.
So
Right. But I think, here, I think, like, for example, roughly at the same time as the movie, just the gender diversity dramatically changes. I mean, I think, like, the class of '70 at Fordham has, 4 women. And then in a relatively short period of time, it becomes, 30% women, which is not like today, but it's a dramatic change.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm afraid our evening's going to have to come to an end. I have a few very quick closing remarks. Please just sit tight for them. The film festival, of course, continues not tomorrow night, as Dean Traynor reminded you, like a Broadway house, we're dark. But we start again at 7 o'clock on Tuesday night with The Confession, and our post-screening guest is the screenwriter, David Black, who had written The Confession. David Jones, who had directed The Confession, was also a guest, but he actually died last month. And there's going to be we're going to actually talk about David Jones a little, and there's Annette Insdorf is going to actually be here to talk about David Jones, who's a wonderful director on Broadway and in the West End and in film. And we originally had both the director and the screenwriter. Now it'll just be David Black, the screenwriter. On Wednesday night, we have Philadelphia at 7 o'clock, also, of course, here with Mark Harris, who's written a wonderful book about films of the 70s. He also writes for the New York Times and Entertainment Weekly. And Alyssa Solomon, who's a cultural critic and a professor at Columbia Journalism. And then the film festival closes on Thursday night at 7 o'clock with Adam's Rib, with Molly Haskell, the longtime film critic for The Village Voice, and other magazines, and a widely published author, and Dan Kimmel, who writes for Variety and the Boston Globe, and has just written a book about romantic comedies. We, of course, in order to sign up for this, of course, you know our website is www.fordhamfilmfestival.org. On November 19th, we have at the Time Warner Center, Sam Waterston from Law & Order for our next forum conversation. In order to register for that, that's fordhamlawandculture.org. We have another great planned event for the spring. We always need to thank, of course, our executive producer, Helen Herman, who makes this all happen. And I would actually like to acknowledge Bob and Irene Hallwig, who is one of the sponsors of our forum, and we need sponsors. Thank you. Thank you. We're very grateful, Bob and Irene. But we're particularly grateful for having John J. Osborne, the author of the novel The Paper Chase. That was a real treat. The forum, we've never done that before. I thought it was only Scott Turow that we've had here, but Scott actually had less to do with the film Presumed Innocent than you did with The Paper Chase. And of course, Professor Paul Bergman from UCLA. For those of you who want free pizza tomorrow at 12:30, Professor Bergman is going to do a second gig for us at the law school in room 205. We're having a lunch with Paul Bergman. And Paul's going to show some clips about some law and film related clips, and we're going to talk, and he's going to give us a really good, cool lecture, and there'll be pizza. So if you want to come and hear Paul again, he's giving us a double dip.
And no calling on anybody.
Right, we know that. And of course, our friend and our incredible leader, Bill Traynor. Thank you all. We'll see you Tuesday night. Really grateful. Thanks.